Hello and welcome to the third episode in our 1988 Kyosho RS-200 restoration from RC Empire. In this video we'll be going through this amazing restoration and showing you the final car as close to its original former glory as possible, so we hope you enjoy. Now this is our first recorded restoration, and the way we have decided to do it is initially with a picture slideshow of us cleaning the parts and then getting into a quick video assembling the final little interesting bits on this car and finishing off with the final summary. So let us know what you think of the format, because we have a number of very cool restorations coming up and we want to make them as enjoyable as possible. So with that covered, let's jump straight into this. As you saw from the first episode of this series, this car came to us in a really bad state. It was covered in years of old oil, mud, grease and all sorts of things, and the dirt was really baked on. So we decided to go with a full strip down of the car. Now initially we tried a number of chemicals and just normal soap, which with this car didn't work, so we moved on to a fully blown engine degreaser and started taking the car apart and washing the bits one by one in the degreaser. We also used a good hard bristled brush to really shift the dirt. A lot of times the parts needed soaking and repeated washing to get them back to new. With the engine degreaser, make absolutely sure that you wash every single trace of it off every single component before you go to re-grease everything, or it might end up eating through the new grease, especially inside the diff cases or closed systems like the gearboxes. And I also wouldn't use this anywhere near ball bearings. What we also used was methylated spirits on a rag to wipe down components, and the great thing about this is that it evaporates almost instantly. As you can see from the images, we absolutely tore the car apart, removing everything. From the servos, which we wiped down and cleaned inside and out, and we even took off the on and off switch, which was full of dirt, grit and all sorts of rubbish. You can see these little rubbers which were on the servos have completely turned to mush, and the rubber has turned really sticky, which is a real pain to remove. We took apart the brake system, which is a really interesting design, and also you can see this little differential mounted on a center prop shaft as well, which we'll see in action later on. Everything on this car has been really well designed and put together. And after 30 years, apart from the dirt, everything is solid and in mostly working order. In some of the pictures, you can see that holes that used to be there have just completely disappeared and been filled with dirt. So this was a full-on restoration. But finally, after a real good clean and scrub down of all the parts, we got them looking almost as good as new. And it took a long time to clean everything up, which is why we decided to have the restoration in pictures instead of a video, because this took days to slowly strip down and clean. One thing that we mentioned in the first video was the state of the wheels, and again the only thing that will shift the dirt off of these was an engine degreaser and a good scrub, and you'll see how these turned out later in the video. And also we've got this little OS engine, which again after a lot of scrubbing and repeated washing turned out really good, and in a later video we might have a full strip down of this. Again, be very careful that degreaser or soap or whatever you use doesn't get anywhere which is supposed to be lubricated, because it will eat away at the lubricant, and that's the last thing you want on an engine. And after all that work, we've almost completed the final product. And it looks stunning. The aluminium and metalwork have come up really good, and 98% of the components we have taken off are still in full working order, which is great. A few of the rubbers have perished, but the rest is as good as new. So the final part of this assembly, and something we wanted to show you, was the assembly of the center diff and the brake system, because it's something quite different and something some of you may not have seen before. So first of all, you have this kind of conventional twin brake shoe design. So you can see as a brake lever twists, it pushes the inner brake shoe towards the other one, which sandwiches the brake disc in between. And we can just push the plastic brake disc between there. The disc is not metal or composite, and it's actually quite thin compared to the ones you would find on, for example, the USA 1 of the same time period. But considering the size and weight of these trucks, this is to be expected. Something which I found very interesting is this center mounted differential, which means the front wheels can spin at a different speed to the rears, and power from the engine will be transferred to the wheels with the least resistance. This reduces stress on the engine and the drivetrain, and is not something you really see anymore. For example, on this Kyosho Pure 10 Alpha from 2001, which was made 13 years later. The centre prop shaft on this to the front and rear differentials acts as a solid shaft. If both of the rear wheels lock, the front ones will also lock, and this acts more like a permanent four-wheel drive system. If both the rear wheels lock on the RS-200, almost all the power will go to the front ones, and the degree at which the shaft on the RS-200 acts as a solid shaft is determined by the thickness of the grease inside the centre differential. If we get back to the assembly now, you can see that the differential and the brake systems are held in place by two upright supports, and you'll see in a minute these are very rigidly held in place. The brake disc, as with many modern systems, is locked onto the drive shaft. You can see there are two flat sides on the inside, and these lock in place over the flat sides of the differentials. As the brake is applied, the whole shaft will slow down. Now, supporting our upright supports and adding rigidity to the whole chassis is this horizontal bar that goes to the front plate, and this front plate is connected to the front differentials and the floor pan. This is connected with a simple nut and bolt. And as you can see, it has already added rigidity to that support. Now, sandwiched between the supports, we have this aluminium tube, and this is not threaded inside, and we have this absolutely massive screw which goes through the whole support structure and all the way through to the back, holding everything together. The final bit of the rigidity comes from this longer aluminium tube, which is threaded on both sides, and this secures to the rear shock towers. And as you can see, with these in place, these uprights and the differentials are already solid, and you've almost got a second layer of support running from the front to back of the car, which helps limit flex in the floor pan. And finally, on the bottom, you have 4 screws holding the upright supports. There are actually 4, and we put the 4th one in later. With that complete, you can put the rear shock back on, and finally, we're ready to put the wheels back onto this car. Another very interesting feature on this model is the interface between the wheel hex and the drive shaft. On a modern setup, you would expect to find a pin in here, keeping the hex from spinning round. But in fact, on this, you have a very simple tapered edge on the shaft. So as the hex is squeezed tight onto the shaft by the nut, this tapered interface locks the wheels in place through friction. Now obviously, the effectiveness of this fit is determined by how tight the nut is, and maybe on a modern high-powered car, you would really need that pin to lock the wheels in place and stop the shaft spinning. But this just goes to show you the evolution and development in component and RC technology, which is pretty cool. And with that on, we can put our newly cleaned original wheels and tyres back on. Quickly, something which a few of you may not have seen before, this car comes with these solid steel bearings. There are 2 of these at each wheel, and you can see the hub is split into 2 with this little dividing wall, and there is 1 bearing on each side of this wall. And finally, on the back we have these plastic hubs instead of the metal ones we saw on the front. So with that wheel on, we are now 95% towards firing this car up for the first time. And it looks amazing. I am surprised at just how well it's come up, including these dirty old wheels which we had, which have come up really nice. The engine in there, you can actually see the OS Max 10 stamped on the side, and it is looking almost as good as new. although annoyingly, it looks like there's a little nozzle that has broken off the side of the exhaust, and I think this is the return to the fuel tank valve. And unfortunately, also the same nozzle looks like it's broken off the side of the fuel tank, meaning we'll need a new fuel tank and a new exhaust, unless we do a little bit of a bodge up, because these are going to be very hard to come by. But saying that, the actual tank and cap have come up really nice. The two plungers still work, one for the carb and one directly into the cylinder head for cold weather starting, according to Kyosho. And here are your two nozzles, one into the carb and one into the cylinder head. On the back and front, we have these really cool looking wide stanced shocks. And underneath, as hoped, the skid plate has come up amazing. It's not bent or cracked, and it's not massively scratched either, which is nice to see. The only thing that I have noticed which is broken is this front bumper, but unlike the nozzles on the exhaust and fuel tank, this won't stop us from running the car. And you have your standard wires for your servos, your electronics, as well as a space for your battery pack and your receiver. And we'll see these in place when we fire up the car. If we move on now, I also wanted to show you the steering system, because again, this is something you really don't see anymore. So, you've still got your conventional servo saver and the servo horn, which is mounted in this right angle arrangement, with one side attached onto this little rail here at the front. As the servo pushes or pulls the horn, it moves the rail side to side and turns the wheels. Really simple. And quickly, you've got 4 bearings holding the drive shafts in place. So you've got one on the front and one on each upright support, either side of the differential, and one on the back, and this shaft leads onto the belt which drives the rear differentials. And apart from that, everything else on this car is relatively conventional. You have your clutch bell on the engine which drives the center diffs, and finally, the finishing touch, we have our fully restored Ford RS-200 shell, which we can put on and complete the car. And this looks fantastic. It's hard to believe that this is the same dirty old car we pulled out of the box in our first video. And we have managed to preserve and restore everything on this car, including the stickers on the body, which is great. And that's it for this video. I hope you have seen a few new things and a few different components which you haven't seen before and may never see again, and I can't wait for our next episode when we fire up this engine, give it a good run and a good tuning, and test out what this 30-year-old car can really do. So please rate and subscribe and keep an eye out for that. Let us know if you have any questions or you'd like to see anything else. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon.